Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about the best books of 2021. These are not necessarily going to be books that were published in 2021, they're just going to be my personal favorite books that I read this year. So let's just get right into it. So I read a lot of books this year. My final total was 234, I think. And so I read a lot, obviously, and I wanted to narrow this down. I actually wasn't planning on doing a top 10, but I did end up with 10 favorites, so this will be my top 10 of the year. I basically went through my Goodreads sort of like wrap up at the end of the year and scrolled through all the books and picked out the ones that I feel like even now at the end of the year still stand out to me as ones that I think about often, or ones that I still look at the cover and think like, yeah, that was a really great book. And so I'm going to be talking about those 10. Like I said, I wasn't planning on narrowing it down this much, but I also wanted to say that a lot of the books I read this year were featured in my top 10 romances of all time video, and I didn't want this video to be the same, obviously, because a lot of the top 10s of all time for me were read this year. So this is going to be books that I just generally think are the best books. Some of them aren't romances, so also like those are thrown in here. But they're all books that I still think about regularly, still recommend regularly, and just overall really, really loved this year. So the first book is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. If you've been on my channel for more than 5 minutes, you've probably heard of me talking about this book because it is my favorite book of all time. This book follows Kala, who was born in Alaska, but her and her mom left when she was like 1 or younger. So she doesn't really remember anything, but her dad stayed there. And she moves to Toronto and is now in her early 20s, I believe, and she is working and she ends up getting fired. And that same day she gets a call from a woman in Alaska saying, hey, your dad's sick, you may want to come visit him. And she's kind of like, okay, I've never really had any desire to visit him before, like why would I go now? And she's like, no, I think you should come. And so she's kind of like going back and forth, like deciding whether or not she's going to do this. And she ultimately decides that like basically the timing is perfect. She doesn't have a job, she doesn't have anything to do really. So she's like, I'll just head to Alaska for like a week or two and go see him and see what's up and whatever. And she ends up going, and before she goes, her mom is like, you know, warning her about these pilots. She's like, don't fall in love with a pilot, like it's horrible basically, because her dad owns an airline. So she kind of knows. And Kala shows up in Alaska, and of course there's a young pilot there to pick her up, and his name is Jonah, and he is like so rude to her right off the bat. Like he thinks she's like this big city girl and like all into her like makeup and clothes and whatever, and she's brought all these suitcases that won't fit on his plane, and he's just like being a real jerk to her right when they meet because he's like kind of annoyed at her and she doesn't really know why. But it's like such an enemies to lovers, like slow burn, like such good like banter between the two of them, like, and the setting in this book is so good. Like there are not many books that I've read, especially like romance books particularly, where I fall in love with sort of the people in the town or the side characters as much as the main couple. But this is one of those books that like I feel just as connected to their neighbors as I do to them. And it's just one of those books where like when you pick up the next books in the series, it feels like you're visiting a place you've been before, and I just really love this one. I recommend it all the time. Obviously it's my favorite book, so of course I do that, but it's just a really good one, and I feel like it will never be one that I don't like. So obviously, like I said, I recommend this one a lot. Next is The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata, and this one is, I feel like, super popular. I think this is probably her most popular book. And it follows a football player who's playing in the NFL and his personal assistant who one day decides she's just had enough of him. He's kind of being like a jerk to her, and she is just like, you know what, I'm gonna leave this job, it was never supposed to be permanent, I'm gonna go start my own graphic design business and just like live my life, and this guy can like hire him another assistant. And so she leaves, and a month later the football player shows up at her door and is basically like, look, you have to come back, like I need you to come back. And she's like, why the heck would I do that? Like I'm making more money now, I've got all my freedom and whatever, like that's not gonna happen. And he finally convinces her to come back. But it's just, this one is like, obviously it's Mariana Zapata, so it's such a slow burn, but it's so worth it. I find she's so good at giving you like just enough that you're not like, wow, this is boring, but like not enough that you're fully satisfied until the end of the book. and I just really, really love her books. This one, like I said, was my favorite of the year. It's one I still think about often, especially the Halloween scene in this book. I don't know what it is about that scene. There's nothing even like really that crazy about it, but I think about that all the time because I just think it was so cute. And so yeah, I really, really love this one. Definitely in my top 10 of the year. Next is Clipped Wings by Helena Hunting. This one I feel like I'm going to sort of count Inked Armor with it because it's sort of a duology. Like, they go together and they sort of, the first one sort of ends on a cliffhanger, so you're going to want the second one, but I think they're both really, really good. I never hear anyone talking about this series. It is a little bit older. I think it was published in 2014. It took me a while to track down a copy of Inked Armor, but it is so good. I really, really love this one. It's another one I talk about a lot on my channel because I don't hear anyone talking about it, so I have like made myself this book's personal like cheerleader. But I love this story. It's about a girl who has had a lot of sort of bad things happen in her past, and she moves to this new town and into this apartment above this bookstore slash coffee shop, and she is working there, and across the street there's a tattoo parlor, and she can see into this tattoo shop from her apartment window. And so she's kind of like watching the guys in there, and she's like, you know, just like noticing them. And she ends up working in this shop, and this guy from the tattoo shop keeps coming over to get coffee from this place, and she eventually finds out that his aunt owns it, and that's kind of why he's always there. But she sort of takes an interest in him, and it's like, okay, like I kind of like this guy, and she's been planning on getting a tattoo for a while, so she like sort of maps it all out and goes into him and is like, this is what I want to do. And it's like massive, like this tattoo that she wants, and he's just kind of like, I don't know, like it's a little big for your first tattoo, like I don't want to like sort of, you know, jump in with both feet kind of thing. And he's kind of hesitant about it, and she's like, no, like I absolutely want this. And they end up like spending a lot of time together, obviously, because it takes her a long time to get this tattoo. And he has a rule about dating clients, so it's sort of got like sort of like a forbidden aspect to it where like they're not getting together. It's like super angsty. It's such a good book. And like I said, the second one is just as good. It goes right along with it. I just really, really love the characters in this one and their relationship. And even the fact that he's a tattoo artist, I just thought that was really cool. I haven't read another book about a tattoo artist, and I just really, really love this one. Next is Credence by Penelope Douglas. This one is hands down my favorite Penelope Douglas book. I think this one was so, so, so good. This one follows a girl who is almost 18, and both of her parents die. And her parents are sort of like these like famous Hollywood actors, and so the whole kind of like press and everything is like super interested in their deaths. And she gets a call from her step uncle, and he's like, hey, I know you're almost 18, if you want to get emancipated and just like keep living in the house, like that's totally fine, I get that, but I just thought I would extend an invitation for you to come live with us if you wanted to do that. And he's like, I live in the woods in this cabin with my 2 sons, and like super like wildernessy kind of thing. And she is like, at first she's like, okay, I didn't even know I had a step uncle, so this is like weird. So she's like, no, like I think I'm good for now. But then like the paparazzi starts kind of, you know, wanting pictures of her, and people want to interview her, and all these people suddenly start taking an interest in her. And so she decides, okay, like I'm gonna go to this cabin in the woods and like get away from it all. But the thing with this cabin is where it is so like isolated that when it snows, they're just like stuck in this cabin. So she goes planning to just stay till she turns 18, but they're like, yeah, if you basically stay till you're 18, then we're gonna be snowed in by then, so you'll have to stay like for like 5 months basically. And so she's like, okay, like fine. And I don't want to like say too much about this one because I feel like it's better if you just have like no idea what's going on when you read this book, but it's just so, so good. Definitely, like I said, my favorite Penelope Douglas book. I really, really love the whole dynamic in this book between her and her uncle and her 2 cousins. I mean, they're not really related, so like it's not like that weird, but I just really love the whole thing that goes on in this book, so definitely check this one out. Next is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I feel like with Colleen Hoover's books, you can't really say much about them without giving away like the entire plot, because her books are so heavily sort of based on their plot twists that if you tell anyone anything about the book, you pretty much have to tell them about the plot twist. And so I don't want to say too much about this one. I know it's super hyped like everywhere, so you've probably seen it before. You probably have some vague idea about what it's about. But I really, really love this one. It's not really, I would say, a romance so much. I mean, it does have like a lot of romance elements to it, like it reads like a romance book, but I wouldn't call the actual story so much a romance. But it was really, really good, and I definitely think everyone should read it. And if you do read this one, definitely read the author's note, because I feel like that is like super, super important with this book. And usually I'm one that like I would skip over an author's note, but in this case I did read it, and I think everybody should, because I think it's really important to the story. Next is Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. This has become my second favorite book of all time. I loved this book. When I read this book, I was so mad at myself because I have seen this book everywhere for so long, and not even in that it was like had gone viral at that point, but more so that like I just kept seeing like YouTubers that I'd been watching recommending it in their older videos, and so I was like, oh, I really want to pick this one up, but for whatever reason I didn't think I was gonna like it. I don't even know why, like what it was about it that I thought I wouldn't like. I think maybe it's because a lot of people have described it as super emotional, which it kind of is, and I'm someone who sort of shies away from books like that because I feel like I'm one of those people that I read to sort of like escape my real life, not so much because I want to like feel things, I guess. And because of that, I tend to avoid books where like anything really bad is happening, I guess. Like I don't want to read books about people dying and things like that because that's not why I'm reading. And so this one I just had heard that it was like super emotional and all these things, and I was like, okay, steer clear of that one. But I finally picked it up for a video I did earlier this year, and I absolutely loved it. It does have like emotional moments, but it's not enough that I felt like it was dragging me down or anything. It was just such a good book, and I really hate that I waited so long to read it. If you have never heard of this one, it follows this girl, Bree, who moves to this small town, which right up my alley. I love a good small town book. And she meets this guy, Archer, in the grocery store parking lot. They kind of run into each other, and she's like apologizing, and he's just like not saying anything to her. And she's like, wow, this guy is so rude. Like I'm like trying to make conversation and he's just like straight up ignoring me. And so she starts asking around town about him afterwards, because she's kind of like, that was so strange, like why was he so rude to me, I literally just met him. And the whole town is kind of like, no, that's Archer, like stay away from him, he's super weird and like reclusive and like no one talks to him kind of thing. And she's sort of like, okay, like I guess that makes sense, but like that seems a little odd. And she is hanging around this town, and she starts riding her bike to the beach every day with her dog. And one day her dog gets loose and ends up in Archer's yard, so she chases the dog in the yard and they sort of formally meet again. And this one was just so, so sweet. If you like guys in books that are super, super sweet and just like wholesome, I feel like this is like the perfect book for you, because I literally just wanted to hug Archer throughout this entire book. Like he was so sweet to her, and just like paid attention to like the little things that she would say she liked and whatever, and he would go out of his way to like find them for her or get them for her, and I just really, really liked that. Next is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and this one I was not expecting to love as much as I did because it's outside of my typical genre. But I really, really love this one, to the point that I've actually got my mom a copy of this book because I was like, you need to read this book. And this one follows a girl who one day gets a letter in the mail saying she needs to come to this estate for a will reading of this guy that she doesn't know. And she kind of just ignores it and is like, okay, this is weird. And then people like show up and they're like, no, you have to come to this will reading. And she's like, okay, fine, I guess I'm going. And she goes to this estate, and she's like not sure why she's there, because she's like, this is really weird, like I don't know this guy or this family, and she seems to be the only like outsider in this sort of like group that's gathered. And she's like, okay, super strange. And they read the will and they find out that pretty much everything was left to her from this guy. And she's like, well, this is like really weird, because like I don't know him, I don't know how he knew me kind of thing. And she ends up sort of stuck in this house with this family who now hates her because she's inherited all of this guy's money. And it's just like really, really good. The second book in the series is really good as well. I love both of them equally. And there's a third book coming out, I believe, in 2022 sometime, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm really excited for that one. It's just like a really good book, and I feel like one of the things I really love about this book is you can recommend this book to literally anyone, because it's like a YA like mystery kind of thing. It's not something that you have to sort of be careful with who you recommend it to, I guess. And I just like that I could like sort of recommend this to literally anyone and I think they would like it. It's just like a universally enjoyable book, and I really like that. Next is Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. This book is sort of interesting because this is one of those books that when I read it, I gave it 4 stars. And I was like, yeah, that was really good. But I wasn't sure. I don't know. I just had this weird feeling about this one. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, maybe it was a 5-star book. Like, I think it was a 5-star. And I kept thinking about it for like a long time after I read it. And I don't really know why even, but just like something about it was like drawing me back to it. And so I think I would give this book 5 stars now. Like I said, it obviously made the top 10 books of this year list. I'm actually currently reading the 2nd book in this series and really, really loving it. So I think the whole series is probably really good. This one is a mafia romance, but I feel like a lot of people let that like scare them out of reading certain books. This one I find is very easy to read if you know nothing about like mafia or mafia romance, because that was me when I read this book. Like, I had never read a mafia romance before. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I don't know a ton about any of that stuff really, and so I was like a little scared going into that sort of genre of books because I was like, what if I don't understand what they're talking about and like different things. This one is really, really good. I feel like for someone who has never picked up a mafia romance before, and just like really easy to understand and really easy to read. And I just like flew through this book, and the 2nd book that I'm reading right now I've been flying through as well, which is like very unlike me, and I just really love them. This one follows a girl who, she's from sort of like this rival family to this other family, and she hates them, and they basically go to crash their party one day, and while they're there she ends up in this room with one of the brothers, or the guy from this other family, and she ends up in this room with him alone, and she's kind of like, oh, awkward, like I need to get out without him sort of noticing, and basically all this stuff happens, and she ends up accidentally setting the room on fire, and he is like obviously super mad, and their families are kind of like arguing now, even though they're like already rivals. Now they're like super mad about each other, and her dad decides that the way to like put this feud to rest and like solve all these problems is she is gonna marry this guy. And she is like, heck no, like he is crazy, like I hate him, like we're not gonna go down that road. And he's equally as mad about it. He's like, I don't want to marry her, like they want nothing to do with each other. But they do end up getting married because they're like, you have to fuse the 2 families, like you guys have to get together. So it's sort of like an arranged marriage kind of situation where she, like I said, can't stand him, ends up with him, and I just really liked that whole dynamic in this book. I've never read a book that was an arranged marriage where they sort of dove into like living with each other and everything right off the bat when they didn't like each other, and I just thought that really added to like the enemies to lovers kind of vibes. And like I said, I just really enjoyed this book. I have been thinking about it a lot since I read it, and like I said, started the rest of the series, and it seems to be as good as the first one, so that's exciting. Lastly is Verity by Colleen Hoover. Again, I feel like I can't say anything about this book. I went into this book completely blind, like I knew absolutely nothing other than that it was a thriller, not a romance, and that was it, and I think that's all you should know. I will say that this book has a lot of romantic sort of elements to it, like what you would normally find in a romance book. It definitely had that sort of as like an underlying plot, almost like, I would say the romance plot was almost equal to the thriller plot in the case of this book. Like, I'd almost classify it as romantic suspense, maybe, but like really suspenseful. And I really, really liked this one. Like I said, think it was crazy. It was super, super good. I read this all in one sitting by accident one night, and just like really loved it. Haven't stopped thinking about it since. Every time I see someone picking up this book, I'm like, yes, you're gonna love it. Like, it's so good. And so this one, like, definitely in the top 10 of the year for sure. And so those are all of the top 10 books of this year. I feel like I should have noted this at the beginning, but those were in no particular order, by the way. But anyway, this will be my last video for 2021. It's obviously going up in 2022, but this will be my last video focusing on 2021 content. The next video will be focusing on my 2022 content and moving forward. And so don't forget to subscribe to see those videos. I do new book videos every single week, and I'll see you next time.